Hello and welcome to Morgan Latif Presents Coaching You Through This Crisis. I'm Sam Latif, co-founder and director of Morgan Latif. And the goal of this podcast is really to offer insights and lessons from our coaching network to our professional network and beyond on not only how to manage, how to cope, but really to thrive in what is an unprecedented time for all of us. So with that in mind, my guest today is Navid Nazemian. Navid has a really interesting background. He combines both the executive coach and the corporate HR leader experience and track record. And with that, he's going to be taking us through what is a really insightful and structured way on how to choose an executive coach. He himself is an ICF accredited and NVW integral coach. He's a certified Hogan assessment practitioner. He has also spoken on this topic across 3 continents, and his focus as a coach is really on executive transitions, maximizing leadership impact, and building high-performance teams. As a HR leader, he's worked for some of the largest corporations in the world, including General Electric, Adidas, and most recently Vodafone, positions where, again, he's held corporate leadership responsibility and global scope. So he brings a really particular lens to this topic, and I think more than ever, where people are looking to upskill themselves, we go through different elements on this topic, and he really weaves in his personal, his professional experience to sort of make it really engaging and really relevant for those listening, so and watching as well. So we hope you enjoy it. And without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. So Navid, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
So I already alluded it a little bit in the intro. You have this kind of unique lens of, you're an executive coach, you're an HR leader, but this is an unprecedented time for all of us. So firstly, from a personal perspective, I mean, how have you been dealing with this?
Yes. So I must say, from a company point of view, we are used to be working from home.
Yeah.
So, and as a coach, you are often used to work either from client premises or from airport lounges, or sort of different places that are not yours.
Yeah, sure.
So that's not something that's new. I guess what is really new this time is the more permanent nature of it. So being now it's getting close to 6 weeks where I have been self-isolating and working entirely from home.
Yeah.
That is new, and that comes with its own challenges. So you need to build in some rigor and some routine into your day.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will drown in emails and work and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to see all the different habits that people are building up, and I think that's sort of something that led us to think about the upskilling that I think everybody is wanting to do, whatever, if that's in baking or if that's professionally in terms of learning a new language, again, thinking about a different expertise that you want to build into your career, your professional or personal life. I think that's what's made it, again, a time for opportunity, should we say, and I think that's also what the purpose of this will be, is to sort of hopefully give people some insights. But look, you're here to talk to us about how to choose an executive coach. But I think before going into that, I always like to understand the origin story, right? So I think it's always really fascinating. I've met and spoken to numerous different coaches. All of them have really interesting backgrounds, be that professionally or in academia, but they decided to also even moonlight or sort of have this sort of, other focus, which is really helping people in their professional and personal lives. So for you, what was it that led you to down this path and to want to be an executive coach?
Sure. So I guess for me, the journey started when I saw the power of coaching when done properly. So I remember as an HR leader sitting in, many forums, talent reviews, and people discussing about a certain leader and thinking whether he or she would be ready for a bigger role and so on. And then the individual, the exec, working with an executive coach for 6, 9, and 12 months, and suddenly next year's talent review, there's a bit of a battle going on as to who should get this leader into the bigger, broader role. So I've always been fascinated by the outcome of the coaching, if done effectively, and also what transformation can actually happen with 2 individuals just sitting down and having a conversation, and then obviously some work on the back end of it. But that was the point of fascination for me, where I felt it's something that I would like to get myself involved in, and be an insider rather than being a buyer of coaching services as a senior
Yeah.
HR leader.
Yeah. Well, again, I can imagine those two perspectives as giving good insights. And I think from this, I said, I think you've prepared this material, obviously quite a unique way of helping people get, a clear criteria or structure on how to really choose the right one for them, which I said at the moment might be more relevant than ever. So I'll pass on to you to hopefully take us through that and guide us through that journey.
Sure. So what I would say before we start to look at the, what I refer to as the golden rules of executive coach selection, is that now more than ever, it's also a time to look at these through the lens of the current crisis. And I will attempt to be looking through that lens as well when we go through these 10 criteria together.
Yeah.
The first one being the experience level. So this is where, a client that is looking to work with a coach should be looking at what is the core expertise of this coach? What is the thought leadership? What is their view on what executive coaching is all about? And I'm less talking about a matching of ages. So if I've had, 20 years of corporate experience, I would ideally like to work with a coach that has been in corporations for 20 years. That may be a good way of looking at it. But what I'm more interested in here is, has this coach the relevant experience that I'm looking for? Or although he or she may have been 20 years in a corporation, have they just finished the coach education? So they are more junior in the journey as a coach, and therefore may not be the right one for me to work with if I've had already some coaching engagements in the past. And what I expect from a senior level coach is more than someone who's just finished their own education and training program.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
And do you think
now?
Do you think on a personal perspective, do you think it matters more? Is it a personal preference? Would somebody feel more comfortable with somebody that has the same type of experience, or somebody that doesn't? Or is that just a set of personal preference?
Yeah, so this will be criteria number 3, and we can jump to that right now. So the third criteria is business understanding and sector experience. So there are right now 2 schools of thought out there. One is saying the coach doesn't need to understand anything about the client organization, the sector they're working in, and their ambition and the challenges. Because if anything, it would be rather an obstacle to work through. The other school of thought is saying, well, actually, it can be quite handful if the coach has the business understanding and the sector experience that the client is looking to work into.
Yeah.
So actually, it's helpful if all of that is already known, so that the coach and the client can get into the real juice and the real issue.
Okay.
My personal view is, Sam, that it ultimately, the right answer lies with the client. So if the client, for instance, is looking at, if the client has always worked as a finance director, and their ambition is to grow into a CEO role, into a general management role, and they're looking to do that in a certain industry, and all their professional life they have spent in that industry, it may be helpful to work with a coach that has some sector experience, because that could be a helpful way of looking at how they could actually break into the next layer up. But ultimately, I think it's right to assume that the right answer lies with the client, and less with which coaching school or which coaching guru is suggesting which approach is the right one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. What I would also say, just to finish these 2 points off, is looking through the current crisis that we are in. If I am challenged with what's going on right now, I may be a P&L leader and I'm working with a remote team that is large and significant. I will not be able to reach out to every single one of my people out there and check in with them the way I maybe be able to do it in the office environment. And if that is something that I'm looking to learn and do, then again, with the experience that we discussed as the first point, I would always look at a coach that has this sort of an experience, so that someone who can help me with, cutting through the matrix, communicating effectively with all sorts of layers of the organization. And this may be more than ever important than that I land a coach that has that experience already under their belt. There's one more criteria before we get to the actual chemistry session, which is accreditation, degree, and the qualification and certification of a coach. So again, here it's less to judge about what methodology they have learned. There's a lot of talk out there about which methodology is superior and so on. I
Yeah.
think for the client, it really shouldn't matter much. What should matter is how does the learning journey of this coach look like? Do they have any professional certification and associations with any professional organization? How have they kept up their knowledge up to date? If they did their training program 20 years ago and all they have been doing is just coaching, how have they made sure that what they are applying today is as relevant as it was 20 years ago? And how could that serve me as a client? I think this is also important here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I know that having the title coach is not as regulated as maybe some other titles. So what would you recommend also to people that really want to ensure about maybe a coach having the right accreditations or the right kind of background? Is it purely references, or are there other things that they can look at?
Correct. Yeah, it's quite shocking actually. I mean, one of the first thing I did when I joined one of my previous roles is to work with the individual who in HR looked after the so-called coach pool. So she looked after, all the exec coaches that were external and were used internally for the senior leaders.
Oh wow.
And when we sat down, and she wasn't a qualified coach, so she didn't really know. She inherited this database of coaches from her predecessor. When we looked at it, I mean, it was shocking to see. I mean, some of the so-called coaches in that database were, had done like an online course for over a weekend, and they were coaching on the back end of it. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So what I would say is, and again, there's no guarantee for any of this, but what I would say is, generally, it's good practice if the coach has as a minimum done a year-long course, whether it's a university offered course or a coach association offered or a coaching school. A year-long course is considered to be a very good solid base for anyone who wants to qualify as a coach. You can look at professional associations. So the ICF being one of the, it's actually the biggest international association of coaches. If they hold an accreditation with that professional institution, it's an indicator that they had to go through some process in order to demonstrate that they are capable as a coach, that they have had some solid training, they've had some coach mentoring and coach supervision. But these are, again, to the individual client, it shouldn't really matter too much. I think what's important is to make sure that some of this is there, and then you will meet with the potential coaches for a so-called chemistry session.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right.
Okay. So the fourth criteria, and I can't really emphasize this enough, is the actual chemistry session itself. So, working in HR, it sometimes does happen that you look at the candidate through the lens of the CV or the search kind of candidate bio. And you're really excited because they are not only well qualified to do the role that you're trying to fit in, but also they seem to be very exciting as a candidate. And then you meet the candidate for an interview and suddenly you realize, very quickly, this is not what we're looking to land as an organization. There may be some cultural clues that you pick up during the first couple of minutes in the conversation that really give you some early warning signs. There are sometimes just the energy is missing, and particularly when you look at kind of the more senior end of the spectrum. Of course, everyone who's turning up for an interview is qualified. That's a given. But what's much more important is, will there be some sort of a chemistry? Can this leader imagine working with this individual for an extended period of time?
Yeah.
And the exact same thing applies to a chemistry session between a coach and a client. So, if I'm a client, I'm talking to a potential coach during this free session, are they engaged? Do they really want this? What's the energy like? What is the listening skills like? Do I get a sense of that they're really able to listen and also read in between the lines?
Yeah.
Yeah, and frankly, do I have a good feeling about it? Is my gut telling me this is the right person to work with? Because the first three criteria, I've already made sure I could essentially pick any of these 2 or 3 people I'm meeting.
Yeah.
But now it's really time to look at it through that lens to say, can I imagine working with this person closely for an extended period of time? And now that we are in the current crisis, it's also important to look at it through that lens and think, if the chemistry isn't there in a room, I think it's fair to assume it won't magically appear suddenly during a Zoom session or a Skype session.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is as good as it gets. And if you can't do the face-to-face, then even more important than when you're doing a virtual chemistry session, that you really feel this coach is, all that you wanted and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, I mean, we're in this new world of social distancing. Um, but it's important to note that I think a lot of coaches are happy to do things via Zoom, and they're able to sort of do these chemistry sessions now, if I'm not mistaken. Is there any also other things that they can look out for to ensure that there's chemistry beyond that?
I think that's really mainly it, because the chemistry is so personal.
Yeah.
I have always worked before I was qualified as a coach based on referrals. So I would look to my fellow HR leaders when I had a senior leader who had a particular development topic, and I would always reach out to them to say, in this particular geography, because I was new in that country, do you happen to know any good coaches, who have a deep expertise in this particular area? And I would go with that, but then just because the HR leader and the organization were happy with that coach doesn't mean that this individual client will have the same chemistry. So it's a very personal thing, and I think that's really important to acknowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to the coaching process, and again, this is not, spending a full hour on the actual coaching process, but really, I think as an individual client, what I would like to know is, what does a typical client process look like? So if you and I were to work together as a coach and a client, just walk me through the individual steps of this journey. I mean, what happens if I were, to sign you up as a coach? Just help me understand, if this is a 6, 9, 12 month engagement, how can I imagine this to be? How often are we going to meet? What will the onboarding or the induction look like? How, what happens in between sessions and so on. So really here it's to get a high level idea about what it's like to work with this coach as a client, unless, but you said we're going to have 10 sessions and suddenly we got 12 sessions or something like that. It's really getting a high level understanding of what the process looks like.
Sure. And in this world that we live in, where it's constantly changing at a faster and faster rate every time, people are looking for better results with shorter spaces of time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend people to have a bit more patience with these kind of processes, or do you think it also then depends on the type of coach you're working with and the type of outcomes that you want?
Yeah, so that's a good segue to the next criteria, which is outcomes. So again, I would like to hear from any coach if I'm doing a chemistry session as a potential
Yeah.
client. Talk to me about the sort of outcomes you have achieved with other clients. And it's not about revealing who, was your client, what exactly happened there. But I really would like to understand what were the sort of outcomes. So if I'm looking to land that big promotion, I've been a functional leader, talk to me about 2 or 3 of your previous clients who have made that journey, who have stepped up from being the most senior leader in their function to be a P&L owner, a general manager type kind of leader. And how did you ultimately measure the outcome? And I think it's really important. It's less about KPIs and things like this, but I think it should be very clear at the outset of this coaching that the coach has a high level idea, once he or she knows what the client topic is, how success will be measured, and what criteria will be evaluated against. By the way, no more than 2 or 3. I'm
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is with some of the coaches that we've spoken to, and again, leaders that we've spoken to that use coaches, sometimes the results are not always as obvious straight after the coaching sessions begin. There's something that sort of takes time. So it's not as easily measurable sometimes, but perhaps people should maybe be clear on expectations on those outcomes, I would say.
Very true. And again, this is one of the other criteria that we haven't explored yet. So let me jump right into that. This is like working in HR. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of what HR does is arguably more difficult to measure.
Yeah.
And I happen to support the finance function as we speak. And boy, it's easy to measure what success looks like in
Yeah.
finance
That's
if you're
true.
an FD. And yet, I think it's relative, right? So what can always be measured. So if I explore for the next 3 or 4 minutes the diagnostic tools and psychometrics that are available to anyone, including
Yeah.
the coach and HR.
Yeah.
So if, for instance, the client has done a 360 degree in that client organization, and they would like to work with the coach based on the outcomes of that survey, it's perfectly normal after the 6, 9, 12 months engagement to trigger another one. And
Yeah.
that's the easiest way to measure success. So if there were, I don't know, 5 or 6 different areas measured as part of that 360-degree feedback, then 1 or 2 areas are the development areas. So this is where the leader would like to improve and get better in. And therefore, it will be very easy to measure that at the outset of the coaching, at the end of the coaching, to come back to it and say, okay, have the coach and the client been able to move the needle in the right direction? That's just one example, but there are many, many more examples, such as, you know, what is the feedback like from the line manager? I think there's sometimes the direct reports and the line manager are typically the people senior leaders interact with the most. So how, you know, how has that shifted? You know, if there was some feedback beforehand, how has that, you know, improved as a result of the coaching engagement and the client doing the actual work?
Yeah.
So I think it's really, really important to not just put it away and say, oh, you know, we're working on soft skills, so we can't measure it anyhow. So let's just, you know, if the client feels good after the coaching engagement, that's great. I actually see that a lot happening.
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
happen to work as a mentor coach. So I work with, you know, coaches that are more at an early stage in their coaching practice. And this is one of the big mistakes that happen very, very often, which is just because the client has a great view about the coach assumes that they have done an amazing job. Now, it's a very good sign if the client has a good view about the coach.
Yeah.
But boy, it would be such a more sustainable and better outcome if not just the client, but everyone surrounding the client. If the entire system,
Yeah.
such as line manager, direct reports, peers, and the organization ultimately has a more positive, more upbeat, more fresh view about this particular leader.
Yeah. And with the outcomes, as you said, and also those tools in general, I mean, do you think people are able to be more honest with a coach when it comes to assessing their own performance and assessing their own blind spots? And is that the reason why it may be more effective?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, you know, one of the many reasons leaders choose to work with an external person, because, you know, there's no real dependency other than the coach and client
Yeah.
relationship. So actually, I may have, you know, performance anxiety. You know, there are all these articles out there around people not feeling that they are competent.
Yeah.
People, you know, thinking that they are some sort of a fraud, and one day someone is going to find out
Imposter syndrome.
that they're
Yeah.
really not that good. Yeah, it's imposter syndrome. And this is one of the many reasons people work with an external coach, because, you know, they can really, and if the trust is building up very quickly with that coach, they can really open up. You know, no one is going to hold that against them, because essentially what happens between a client and a coach is what is the confidentiality of the two, which again brings me to the next topic. So ethics and confidentiality is sometimes really, really tricky, but it can actually be very straightforward. So any coach that has a accreditation with the International Coaching Federation, the ICF, they work based on a confidentiality agreement with any client of theirs, even if the client is paid for by the organization. So it's really, really critical that this confidentiality is being maintained. So if you were to go back for a minute and think about these learning outcomes, generally what is considered to be good practice is if the coach meets with the line manager, HR, and the client at the same time, getting a brief on what is the development topic at hand. So that can be as transparent as it gets. And then the coach will then work with the client the first 1 or 2 sessions and come up with no more than 2 or 3 learning outcomes. And these will be communicated back to the line manager and HR and the organization in that way. All that gets reported back on midway and at the end of the coaching is that. Anything else that is being asked to be shared, whether by HR or by the line manager or the organization that is paying the actual coach, will need to be signed off by the client. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So confidentiality agreement means, you know, the client gets to sign off whatever gets shared with whoever in writing, and that's the easiest way of doing it. So
Yeah.
again, you know, what is the understanding of the coach around ethics? You know, are they in supervision themselves? You know, I work as a coach for many, many years now, and yet there's always someone who's more experienced and more knowledgeable than I am. So I will work with that individual in a supervision kind of type way. So I will bring my own dilemmas and challenges that I sometimes face with my clients or as an individual to that conversation. And that's, again, that's considered to be a good practice because, no individual coach has figured it out just on their own. And therefore, you always have to have some accountability partner, someone else who is more experienced, more knowledgeable than you are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So I just touched upon this item, which I titled Credible References and Testimonials. So I said early in my career as an HR leader, and given that I worked in a couple of different geographies, some of which I didn't have a prior experience in, I always reached out for references. I think it's a very good thing to do in general. So if there's one thing people can do is to look at this as, this and the first three criteria are going to make sure that you have a 60% chance of landing the right coach for yourself. So has this coach worked at the level that I'm in right now, as a coach? So has he or she dealt with, if I'm a senior vice president, has he or she worked with SVPs in the past? Is the first thing. And if so, what do some of the testimonials look like? And again, they don't have to reveal the name and the job and the full detail of the client, but they should refer to the job title and the kind of organization or the sector that the client worked in. And what results have been achieved for these clients. And generally speaking, that's a very good thing to do. So having credible references and also testimonials.
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing, I think you showed me a Forbes article as well, in particular about how, though obviously the ability now to just ask about or get references on coaches is just a lot easier because there's now an acceptance of using a coach versus 10, 20 years ago, correct? And also all this information that's available, the democratization of a lot of these services, which are no longer exclusive to the C-level suite. It's now been accessible to a lot more people. So would you say that's kind of probably the first thing people should seek out when they get a recommendation, is to just ensure that those testimonials or those references are made available by whoever they're looking to use?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, coaching as a profession has come a long way.
Yeah.
And I remember earlier on in my career when I went through the GROW coaching model, which is a very, very simplistic model of coaching. And, this came from, someone in the US. And if back then, if in the US someone said, I need a coach, everyone was thinking sports.
Yeah.
And that's how the whole thing started.
And
now I think nowadays the perception of coaching has dramatically shifted towards positive. And I often have conversations with clients and potential clients who would like to pick their coach, who would like to get started right on, although the coach is going through the onboarding process with the organization of that client. So it's, coaching has come a long way. And I think it's just a testimony to what the profession has been able to, achieve in its totality in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I was reading is it's when it originated a lot from Silicon Valley. Bill Campbell was famously somebody that coached people like Steve Jobs and Larry Page. And then again, I think a lot of the things now which are happening in Silicon Valley starts a particular working trend, and obviously that gets filtered down to other industries because they see results. But you're right. I think the explosion in the industry has been pretty impressive. I think the figures that we collected were from 2009. It was worth $9 billion, according to the IBIC, and now it's worth up to $15 billion. I mean, that's a huge growth over 10 years. So it'd be interesting to see how it evolves moving forward as well.
Yes, I think it's also a testimony to some of the senior leaders raving about outcomes of coaching publicly. So Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, one of those who has said, and there are video snippets of his speech out there to say, I would have never achieved what I achieved without an executive coach. So it's also those testimonials that are made public that ultimately give credibility to the right coaching. They're still, the black sheeps are out there, and they're still calling themselves a coach, and they're still earning money. But really, I mean, if anybody applied these 10 criteria, it's a very high probability that will land the right coach. And they will achieve amazing outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, speaking from experience, we had what we called performance coach at our last firm. All the leaders that I've spoken to, I think very, 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 very rarely do I get the feedback now that look, they've used the coach and they didn't see value from it. So um, it's certainly going to be continuing to kind of grow, and we'll see, as I said, how it develops.
Yes. So the last rule, Sam, is the actual contracting framework. So again,
Hmm.
how will expectations be managed in an organization? So, once the induction session, the development topic session has been agreed upon with HR and the line manager and the client, how do we go about setting boundaries? Are we absolutely crystal clear about what gets shared with whom? We touched upon the diagnostic tool. Who gets to see that? Who's got the ultimate ownership of data? But also, I think I would like to know as a client what happens in between sessions. So if I have a fortnightly rhythm with the coach, or a monthly session agreed, and then in between two sessions something happens that is important and of major importance to me individually, can I reach out to them in between? Will they be available for an in between session? If so, will that be charged extra, and so on? So what's actually included in the support
Yeah.
of the coach, and what would be considered to be outside of the coaching agreement?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think one of the main things that I think also people think is just, I mean, we haven't delved in it too much, but I think it'd be interesting to get your take, because in terms of the cost of a coach, and I know with any service profession, you have people at the very high end of the spectrum, and the people that obviously will be on the lower end. But what would be your advice to people that maybe firstly think that the cost of a coach might be prohibitive? Um, do you think that's a misconception?
Look, I mean, any good coach should look at pricing the offering depending on the client level of income and need as well. So if I work with a distressed NHS worker, I should probably not charge what I would charge as an exec coach
Yeah, of
to a
course.
senior leader whose client organization is paying me for the service that I provide. So it comes back to the ethics of it. Will I also offer pro bono services and so on? There's very good research out there suggesting that the investment in a coach on average is about sixfold. So if someone spends 10K in a proper coaching engagement, the minimum they should expect is sixfold in terms of outcomes for the individual and for the client organization. So I think that, again, there are many studies out there. So it's a real no-brainer. And I also happen to know that a lot of organizations these days are using executive coaching as an onboarding add-on. And it's one of the three areas I've specialized in. So, if you look at what is the total cost to an organization if a leader fails, and if it's a senior leader, what is the real damage to the organization? Yes, of
Yeah.
course, there will be some fee for the firm that, through which the individual was hired into the organization, but the damage that is being created as a result of the role being vacant for some months, the damage that may be created because the individual didn't have the right chemistry or didn't have the right fit or didn't see the early signs that were in the organization given to them. And if you add it all up, I think it really is critical that this is being looked at as a serious investment and not as a nice to have or as an additional option,
Yeah, yeah.
something that one could think about doing. But really, I think it's a no-brainer in my books, and particularly if you're looking at the more senior end, what you would pay for any coach compared to what the individual earns as a total package any given year is a fraction of that investment. So it should really be, as an organization, I think people should really want to make sure that the leader is onboarded effectively and they have all they need in order to succeed.
Yeah.
Now, during the times of crisis, more than ever before, I've had
Yeah.
senior clients who have spoken to me who are starting their new role without being able to see their teams physically. And so it's a very, very new situation, and they're getting their onboarding physically, virtually instead of getting it physically. So
Yeah.
so having an accountability partner, having a thinking partner who knows a thing or two about the industry and the organization is really, really going to help them succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned obviously I never knew that sixfold return on investment on coaching, which, as you said, makes it pretty much a no-brainer. I mean, as a search firm, we know the cost of a bad hire can range anything from $12,500 up to, $200,000, depending on the position and the company. But that's a very strong argument if people have been shown to get a sixfold increase on that. So, yeah, as you said, more than ever, people are investing in themselves. It'd be kind of food for thought at the moment, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And again, just to sum it up, I think applying the golden rules in coach selection, also now during the times of crisis, will substantially increase the likelihood of landing the right coach.
Yeah.
And also ensure that the client has a partner on their side that will help them grow beyond what they imagine is possible. And now more than ever, I think it's the time to get into that and to use the opportunity to work with someone who can help you grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Navid, thank you very much. I think you said that information has hopefully given people a really good structure, a really good criteria for when they're considering their own their coach themselves. As you rightly mentioned, now more than ever, it could be really valuable to know. So really appreciate it. We'll obviously make this information online as well. And again, best of luck in obviously this continuing, situation for all of us. And yeah, thanks again for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you, Sam. All the best.
Take care. Bye-bye.